And Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the final day of evidential hearings in Tranche 1, Phase 1 at the Undercover Policing Inquiry. My name is Jacqueline Purser and I'm the Hearings Manager. As a reminder to those of you in the virtual hearing room, please turn off both your camera and microphone unless you are invited to speak by the Chairman. I will now hand over to our Chairman, Sir John Mitting, to formally start proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. For the next 25 minutes or so, Ms. Campbell is going to summarise the evidence of a number of officers who are not being called to give live evidence. We will then have a 10-minute break and resume our evidential hearings. Ms. Campbell.
Thank you, sir. I'll begin with the summary of HN 333. HN 333 served on the SDS for 9 months from late 1968 to 1969. He has cooperated with the inquiry to provide a written witness statement. There is a restriction order in force preventing the publication of both the real and cover names of this officer. In light of this, the specific group targeted by this officer has also not been published. Prior to joining the SDS, HN 333 worked in Special Branch. While in Special Branch, he attended the 27th of October 1968 Grosvenor Square demonstration as a plainclothes officer sent to mingle with the crowds and help establish the intention of activists on the day. HN 333 states that he had not worked in an undercover identity prior to joining the SDS. HN 333 was recruited to the SDS subsequent to the October demonstration. He states in his witness statement that the subject was first proposed informally by more senior colleagues, although he cannot recall who. At the time, there was talk within Special Branch of the need for improved intelligence to help assess future protest and unrest. There was no formal joining process for the SDS. HN 333 describes his cover background as, quote, rudimentary. He adopted a cover name, cover employment, and lived in cover accommodation. Unusually for officers at the time, HN 333 states that he spent most evenings at his cover address. He was single when he joined the SDS. HN 333 was deployed against a left-wing group that no longer exists. He found this group by answering a public advertisement that had been suggested to him by someone in SDS management. He would provide verbal reports on the group's activities, most often during regular meetings at the SDS Safe House. HN 333 did not assume any roles of responsibility within the group and describes it as a loose association. His tasking did not change during his deployment. HN 333's deployment was interrupted by illness, causing him to pause his undercover duties for a few weeks. He states in his witness statement that he believes that this made his deployment less effective. Ultimately, it was decided to withdraw this officer due to health reasons. The withdrawal was planned, and HN 333 states that he was able to give his excuses to his target group, although he cannot remember the specific reason he gave. Following withdrawal, HN 333 undertook several training courses and ultimately returned to Special Branch in an unrelated field. He recalls undertaking a written debrief following deployment, which addressed welfare issues. In general, HN 333 describes the welfare arrangements at the time as, quote, ad hoc but effective. There is no evidence to suggest that HN 333 used the name of a deceased child, engaged in sexual activity, or formed any close personal relationships while in his cover identity. So that concludes the summary for HN 333. I will now move on to HN 339. HN 339 served on the SDS from 1970 to 1971 using the cover name Stuart Goodman. There is a restriction order in force preventing the publication of the real name of this officer. HN 339 joined Special Branch in the late 1960s. He dealt with Special Branch inquiries before being tasked to investigate the Campaign Against Racial Discrimination. HN 339 states in his witness statement that during this time, he did attend meetings of the activist group, but never in an undercover identity. HN 339 held the rank of detective sergeant when he was approached to join the SDS. The earliest reporting from this officer held by the inquiry is from early October 1970. However, a memorandum concerning SDS expenditure indicates that HN 339 was renting a cover flat from at least April of that year. HN 339 was married when he joined the SDS. No managers discussed the effect his recruitment might have with his spouse. HN 339 adopted the cover identity of an unemployed musician, and as such, had no cover employment. He rented a cover flat in the Streatham area, but only stayed overnight occasionally. HN 339 states in his witness statement that he was originally directed to infiltrate the anti-apartheid movement. Early reporting held by the inquiry shows that HN 339 reported largely on the activities of the Dam Busters Mobilization Committee, a sister group to the anti-apartheid movement, aimed at protesting the construction of the Cahora Bassa Dam intended to supply electricity to South Africa. He appears to have remained in this group until February 1971, reporting on planned protest activities. HN 339 also reported during this time on an upcoming conference by the anti-apartheid movement, where Michael Barnes MP was due to speak. HN 339 was subsequently directed to infiltrate the International Socialists. He replied to a newspaper advert from the group seeking volunteers and started attending meetings of the Lambeth branch from late February 1971. Eventually, he was appointed to the role of branch treasurer. HN 339 recalls in his witness statement that this brought him close to the branch secretary at the time and describes himself as, quote, effectively his right-hand man. The inquiry holds reporting from HN 339 on the International Socialists from February to November 1971. During this time, he reported on a mix of public and private meetings, including the 1971 IS Easter Conference and the annual IS Rally in Skegness. Much of his later reporting deals with an internal party rift that arose between the main leadership of the International Socialists and members of the so-called Trotskyist tendency. Coverage of this particular issue was continued by HN 343, John Clinton, from within IS after HN 339's reporting ends. HN 339 recalls being involved in some fly posting while in his cover identity, but no other criminal activity. Near the end of his deployment, HN 339 was involved in a road traffic accident while driving an unmarked police car, which necessitated the involvement of his supervisors on the SDS. HN 339 states that he does not remember much about his withdrawal from the field, but suspects that this event may have been a catalyst for the end of his deployment. There is no evidence to suggest that HN 339 used the name of a deceased child or engaged in sexual activity while in his cover identity. So that concludes the summary for HN 339. I'll move on to HN 349. HN 349 joined the SDS in the early 1970s. He was in the squad for approximately 1 year, targeting anarchist groups in central London. There is a restriction order in force preventing the publication of both the real and cover names of this officer. In light of this, the specific groups targeted by this officer have also not been published. The inquiry has no contemporaneous reporting from HN 349's deployment. However, he has cooperated with the inquiry to provide a written witness statement. HN 349 joined the SDS after a relatively short time on Special Branch. He was recruited after meeting with an undercover officer who explained the nature of the role. There was no formal training. HN 349 spent some time in the SDS back office before deployment, where he was able to read reports and gain a feel for the information that was collected. During this time, he also met on 2 or 3 occasions with active UCOs in the SDS cover flat. HN 349 was married when he joined the SDS. No manager spoke to his wife or discussed the impact that a deployment might have on his family life. At the start of his deployment, HN 349 was not asked to target a particular group. He was simply tasked with attending any demonstrations taking place in central London and getting to know the regular activists. Ultimately, he was tasked with attempting to get involved with various loose-knit anarchist groups. HN 349 describes his cover identity as being not as, quote, developed as that of his colleagues. He had a cover name and a cover flat, though he never actually slept there. He did not have a cover employer. HN 349's deployment was ultimately unsuccessful. He describes in his witness statement how he was unable to strike up any real relationships with the activists in his group or gain their trust, as they were highly suspicious of strangers. Approximately 9 months into his deployment, HN 349 met with his managers, and the decision was made to withdraw him from the field. No method of exfiltration was required, as HN 349 had not managed to sufficiently assimilate within his group. After his withdrawal, HN 349 spent some time again in the SDS back office before ultimately returning to Special Branch. While working in Special Branch, HN 349 did work with intelligence that was gathered by the SDS, although that material would not have been specifically identified as such. He states in his witness statement that after some time, most Special Branch officers were, quote, aware of the SDS and had an idea of the kinds of groups that they had infiltrated, end quote. HN 349 also states that he would have occasionally made requests for specific information from the SDS while in Special Branch. There is no evidence to suggest that HN 349 used the name of a deceased child, engaged in sexual activity, or formed any close personal relationships while in his cover identity. So that concludes the summary for HN 349. I'll now move on to my final summary for HN 343. HN 343 served on the SDS from early 1971 to September 1974, using the cover name John Clinton. He infiltrated the International Socialists, the IS, in particular the Hammersmith and Fulham branch. There is a restriction order in force preventing the publication of the real name of this officer. He has cooperated with the inquiry to provide a written witness statement. HN 343 joined Special Branch in the late 1960s, a process which he remembers in his witness statement as involving, quote, lots of interview and testing. HN 343 states that, during this time, he would attend public meetings of various groups of interest to Special Branch, as was common practice, and would give a fake name if asked. He had not, however, worked in a formal undercover identity before joining the SDS. He states that he was not aware of the SDS before joining, but that there were, quote, vague whispers in Special Branch of the existence of a secret unit. HN 343 joined the SDS in early 1971, after being approached by the chief inspector at the time, Phil Saunders. There was no formal training provided. He was single at the time of joining the SDS, and no one spoke to him or his family about the potential impact that an undercover deployment might have on him personally. Shortly after joining the unit, HN 343 fell ill, causing a delay of several months in his preparation for deployment. HN 343 also recalls spending 3 to 4 months in the SDS back office prior to deployment, reading reports and, quote, getting up to speed with the political landscape. HN 343 describes his undercover legend as basic and without any elaborate detail. He adopted the cover name John Clinton and gave his cover employment as that of a van driver, which he states was chosen as it would have provided an excuse if members of his group saw him in an unexpected area of London. He rented cover accommodation in the Fulham area and was provided with a cover vehicle. Although he cannot remember any details, HN 343 states that he would have discussed his cover name and legend with his managers before being deployed. HN 343 was tasked by his managers to infiltrate the International Socialists. The earliest reporting from this officer held by the inquiry dates from October 1971. Although the majority of the reporting from this officer held by the inquiry from between October 1971 and March 1972 relates to the Croydon branch of the IS, HN 343 has explained in his witness statement that this is likely due to the held documents not reflecting the totality of his reporting during this period. HN 343 states that he began his deployment by attending various meetings and demonstrations of the IS across London, before ultimately focusing on the Hammersmith and Fulham branch. He chose this branch because there was, quote, a lot of Irish activity discussed, end quote, a subject that he knew would be of great interest to the MPS. HN 343 notes that it was easy to join the IS, as the group was keen for members. While in his cover identity, HN 343 states that he deliberately avoided forming any close relationships and cultivated the persona of someone who was unreliable and a bit flaky to avoid being given any responsibility within the group. HN 343 states that he understood the SDS to be interested in both issues of public order and counter-subversion at the time of his deployment. HN 343 notes that at the time, the IS was, quote, a large group that would attend lots of demonstrations, end quote, and were a, quote, Trotskyist subversive group with links into Irish groups, end quote. Although violence was witnessed at these events, HN 343 states that it would, quote, rarely come directly from IS members, end quote, but rather a minority of other groups. HN 343 likewise states that he did consider the group to be subversive, explaining that, quote, IS were constantly trying to exploit whatever industrial or political situation that existed in the aim of getting the proletariat to rise up. HN 343 attended a wide range of events, both public and private, ranging from very small meetings attended by a handful of people to very large events attended by thousands. His reporting provides significant coverage of the internal affairs of the IS, including elections and appointments made, campaigns and talks, recruitment, preparations for the 1972 annual conference, and the split with the Trotskyist tendency, an internal rift previously covered by HN 339. HN 343's reporting also touches upon union membership and industrial action taken by members of the IS. HN 343 himself was not a member of a trade union. There is also coverage in the reporting of IS involvement in numerous campaigns supported by the group, including Irish Matters, women's liberation, tenants' rights, and the anti-apartheid movement. HN 343 states in his witness statement that he had considerable discretion as to what he reported on during his deployment. However, he would have been guided by what he knew would have been of interest to Special Branch at the time. His general tasking and ongoing updates from his deployment would have been discussed regularly with his managers, Chief Inspector Saunders or Detective Inspector HN 294 at weekly meetings in the SDS Safe House. HN 343's personnel file suggests that he left the SDS in September 1974, although the inquiry only holds reporting from this officer up to December 1973. HN 343 states that he made the decision that his deployment should end, as he had had enough of the life of an undercover officer. His managers were supportive of this decision. HN 343 undertook what he describes as a phased withdrawal from his group, telling members that he was going traveling. HN 343 does not recall any formal debrief following his withdrawal. He was not offered any post-deployment support. HN 343 states that his time as an undercover officer, quote, definitely changed him as a person, end quote, although he states that he has not had any psychological issues as a result. He describes himself as very private in his personal affairs, something he attributes to his deployment. HN 343 was posted to Special Branch C Squad for a few months in the late 1980s. In his witness statement, he notes that he would have received intelligence from the SDS in this role, but it would be sanitized and not identifiable as such. He would not have known at the time what the unit was doing or which groups were currently infiltrated. HN 343 retired from the MPS after 30 years service. There is no evidence to suggest that HN 343 used the name of a deceased child, engaged in sexual activity, or formed any close personal relationships while in his cover identity. So that concludes the summary for those officers. In addition to publishing the documents and witness statements relating to those officers, the inquiry today will be publishing as well documents in relation to 5 former members of the SDS who have not provided witness statements. They are firstly, HN 346, real name Jill Musdell, cover name unknown, who reported on the groups Stop the 70 Tour, the Anti-Apartheid Movement, and related groups. The inquiry's analysis of those documents can be found at page 136 to 138 of Appendix 2 of Counsel to the Inquiry's written opening statement. Secondly, documents will be published for HN 338, real name restricted, cover name unknown, who reported on the groups the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign, the International Marxist Group, in particular the Notting Hill and West London branches, and the Anti-Internment League. Our analysis can be found at page 161 to 166 of our written opening statement. Thirdly, documents will be published for HN 1251/371, real name Phil Saunders, cover name, if any, is unknown, who was a detective inspector in the SDS. Our analysis can be found at page 180 to 183 of Counsel to the Inquiry's written opening statement, Appendix 2. Fourthly, documents will be published for HN 332, whose real name is restricted. Cover name, if any, is unknown, who was a detective inspector in the SDS and subsequently the head of the SDS. Our analysis can be found at page 183 to 186 of Appendix 2 of our written opening statement. Finally, documents will be published for HN 394, whose real name is restricted and the cover name, if any, is unknown. He was also a detective sergeant and then detective inspector in the SDS and subsequently the head of the SDS. Our analysis of these documents can be found at page 186 to 189 of Appendix 2 of Counsel to the Inquiry's written opening statement. Thank you, sir. That's everything.
Thank you very much. We'll resume in about 10 minutes with today's evidential hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. We will now take a short break and we'll resume at 11:35. You may now go into your breakout rooms. Thank you.